Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly edition of the Wrap. I'm Laura Leslie, WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief.
And I'm Paul Spey, PolitiFact reporter and WRAL state government reporter.
And election reporter this week, well, although who wasn't an election reporter this week? How many stories did we do this week?
Oh my gosh, I lost count. It's probably over a dozen. And we pulled in Brian Murphy, who now is supposed to be on sports duty, but couldn't get away from us.
Mission creep, right?
Right.
It would be a crime. We were very thankful to have Murph helping us out, as well as Brian Anderson, Travis Fay, and Jack Cagle, you and me, and a cast of thousands from the WRAL TV newsroom. So it's some week of coverage. I'm sure everybody who's going to watch this or hear this is already going to know pretty much how things turned out. But we should mention a couple of legislative races that we were watching pretty closely. One of them was Kirk Devier, and you wrote about this, Andy. This is, he was singled out by Cooper, and Governor Cooper basically, straight out. Went with his opponent, Val Applewhite, which was really interesting to a lot of people, I think.
I can't remember if we've had a situation like that in recent years. Maybe you can, but that was interesting because we wondered, like, hey, Devier was crucial back in, 2018 for flipping that seat from Republican Wesley Meredith to the Democrats. And so we wondered, like, well, does he have the connections and the popularity he needs to keep it despite, the governor's allies coming after him for allegedly, working too much with Republicans. And so, we got to see that the governor and his people and his candidate, not to take anything away from her, of course not, Val Applewhite were all strong, and it wasn't all that close.
No, I was surprised at how not close it was. I really thought that Devier would have more support from the community. So that was quite a shocker to me. And also quite a message to be sent to some of the House and Senate Democrats who sometimes like to wobble on whether or not they're going to uphold a veto. Kirk Devier did vote, I think, for one override vote. And I think that was it. I think it was the budget. So, anyway. Others races, though, very interesting. As everybody knows, probably there's a lot of double bunked folks because we have the new maps to work with, of course. So we had Ralph Hayes and Deanna Ballard in a match extraordinaire up in Western NC. Ralph Hayes did pull that off, but also that was a squeaker. Deanna Ballard, also a member of Senate leadership. So it was very, very interesting race to watch. That the makeup of that district changed enough to make it really competitive. And that was one that I was curious to see. It was so close. Another one, Norm Sanderson pretty easily beat Bob Steinberg out in Senate 1. They were drawn together. A couple of the ones in the House that caught my attention were kind of upsets, one of which was Ben Moss, who is a freshman Republican from Richmond County, upset Jamie Bowles, who has been in the legislature since God was a boy, I think. And he, Bowles is a longtime member of leadership at the legislature as well. But the way that district was redrawn really put a lot more of the vote in Richmond County, which of course was Ben Moss's folks. And so he pretty handily beat Jamie Bowles. And then of course, Jake Johnson beat David Rogers, but that's not too big of a surprise.
Right. I think I was talking to Republican sources that night. They were surprised by Steinberg losing. And they said, if anyone is surprised that Ballard was so close with Heiss, they should not be. They told me she does not get the credit she deserves for being an effective politician, but also for being really popular out there. So I just wanted to throw that in there and say, like, Heiss winning was not a foregone conclusion. And the people I talked to on the Republican side were not surprised that it was close.
Interesting. That's really good to know. Another one that we were watching is one that's going to shape up to be like old home week. This is Toby Fitch. He was drawn. Well, Raymond Smith was a Wayne County Democrat who was drawn into the same district with John Bell, the House Majority Leader. So he decided to run for Senate instead. So he challenged Toby Fitch for his Senate seat. Toby Fitch won that one. And then on the other side, I think it was Buck Newton that won that one. Remember, he retired from the Senate in 2016 to run for state attorney general unsuccessfully. And so he wants his old job back. So it'll be a really interesting matchup out there between the two of them out in Wilson.
Did we ever end up counting how many former legislators are trying to make comebacks?
I think I ended up counting 9 or 10. It's in one of our stories somewhere, but yeah, there were a lot of folks who did. And a lot of them, not surprisingly, won their primaries, but some of them didn't. Shirley Randleman and Lee Zachary were both running in, I think, Yadkin County, if I'm remembering correctly. And neither of them won that district, won the primary in that district. So that's very interesting. And there were a couple other cases where people that you thought would be a shoo-in were not, in fact, but some other folks did. Like I said, Trisha Cotham, for example, won hers pretty easily, and she's almost certainly coming back because that's a Democratic district.
Right.
So anyway, looking at some of the other stories, you had a great story this week about money being sort of what talked in this election. Talk a little bit about that.
Right. That was a theme that emerged after Tuesday. Was you looked at the landscape of just the election field, and you look at the U.S. Senate race, and you see where someone like Ted Budd, who, he hasn't been in Congress all that long, but his resume doesn't stand out, at least not in comparison to former Governor Pat McCrory and Mark Walker, who was in Congress for 6 years and rose up the ranks there, and yet because of the power of Club for Growth, the think tank out of Washington, D.C., and paired with a Trump endorsement, I mean, he won, I feel like I should say in a landslide, because it certainly felt that way. But based on polling, we knew that was coming. So then
maybe not to that extent though. 50
right.
plus. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
That was the surprise, was the extent of the win. We sort of expected him to pull it out. We didn't know that the Club for Growth money paired with Trump would go that far, and getting him that much support. And then you start to look at the congressional races. Club for Growth threw its weight around in the 13th district, which is expected to be the most competitive in North Carolina. And Bo Hines, he's 26 years old. Nothing against young people, but I mean, he doesn't have any time in elected office. And some of his opponents criticized him for never having a quote unquote real job. And yet he pulled that out against former Congresswoman Renee Elmers, Kelly Daughtry, and
DeVan Barber. DeVan Barber, who was a locally endorsed candidate. Did not have a lot of money to do a lot of TV airtime, but he knew enough people in Johnston County and in the district that he didn't necessarily need to. So he was only about 3 points behind Hines.
Right.
Kelly Daughtry was kind of a distant third, and then Kent Kiersey came after that. And I think Renee Elmers was somewhere in the single digits.
Right. And so I had before the election night, we heard whispers of Barber. I had people telling me like, not that he might win, but he's going to do better than people think. I think most people thought it was between Daughtry and Hines. And, you have $1.5 million coming from Club for Growth to get your name out there on the airwaves. And that, again, paired with Trump's endorsement, pulled him across the finish line. And then you look at the Democratic side with the pro-Israel group AIPAC putting in, paired with Protect Our Futures PAC, which was founded by the cryptocurrency billionaire.
Right.
Valerie Foushee got, what was it? I think it was $3.4 million in outside support. And that race wasn't close either. And then you look at Don Davis in the first congressional district. And, I wondered, as I think other people did, would that be closer because of his record voting for anti-abortion bills, and at a time like this when everyone's thinking about this Supreme Court leak, what's going to happen to Roe v. Wade, would that hurt him? But that race wasn't close either. And again, the theme was outside spending, AIPAC and the cryptocurrency billionaire guy, and on the Republican side, Club for Growth. I mean, the people with generally the most outside spending won. And you could argue that without outside spending in Madison Cawthorn's race, that he probably pulls it off. He had his own scandals, and he had raised $3 million for his own campaign.
Yeah, and he certainly had plenty of name recognition by this point in the news cycles, right?
Yes, of course. Lots of name recognition for positive and negative reasons. But, you had $1.5 million in that race coming in and getting on the airwaves to attack him. And it knocked him out. And so, right, we have that story on our website about just those themes of the outside money really making a difference.
And I had a story about the 13th, looking at it in terms of in migration. It is interesting. It's going to be the most competitive district. And part of that, of course, is the way that it's drawn. But part of that is where it's located. It's simply in the southern area of the triangle. And that's where a lot of the growth is happening from southern Wake County on through Johnston County, Harnett, a little bit of Wayne County. And so we're seeing some demographic shifts in the area as people are moving in from other states. So it'll be very interesting to see who comes out ahead in that one. You got Wiley Nickel up against Bo Hines. Wiley Nickel already trying to basically associate Bo Hines with Madison Cawthorn, calling him another Madison Cawthorn. Bo Hines obviously not real pleased about that and says we're very different people, but they have appeared together relatively frequently, including at a recent rally, the Trump rally in Selma.
It'll be interesting to see how Hines handles that comparison. I know he's already said we're not the same person, but how will he demonstrate that on the campaign trail? I'm interested just to hear how he differentiates himself. Cawthorn.
Yeah, and so looking at that, so those are kind of our interesting stories of the week. Brian Anderson had a good one about how the media, basically how some candidates are avoiding the media, and it seems to be working just fine for them.
Right, I saw that, and we saw that theme a little bit too with some of the candidates being hesitant to participate in debates, like Ted Budd. He had to participate in a debate.
Yeah, he did not.
Fine.
And Valerie Fouché also did not participate in some of the panels that were with her, Nita Alam and Clay Aiken, some of her competitors. And then, we didn't have any debates really in the 13th, I don't think. But, that's another one where we're kind of watching to see, a candidate that's not super accessible to the media, and in some ways these stories kind of make me edgy because I kind of think to myself, well, they should be talking to us. It's like, well, not everybody thinks that. And, and not everybody thinks that the media is special and, and that it's okay to just talk to voters. And that's maybe preferable. But it is true that when you're running as a congressional candidate or a Senate candidate in a large district, the only way you're going to be able to talk to all your voters is going to be, through the media. So I think there is an argument to be made there. And, the thing about running an air war, which is what we saw, I think, in the US Senate race on the Republican side for sure, is that, you never get to ask a question, right? All you hear about is what they want you to hear about. And you don't get to actually hear that candidate interact with other candidates and defend their positions. And explain their positions. So anyway, I'll just say, I thought it was a good story.
You beat me to it. I was going to ask you, you've been doing this longer than I have. Did it feel different this year?
It did. There's just a lot of control. That is the theme on both sides is control, campaign control, message control. And so you can control an air campaign. You can control a speech, right? You can't control a debate. You can't really control a gaggle. You can pick and choose who you talk to. And some candidates are pretty clearly doing that. That's something that a lot of candidates try to do is to shop around for the reporter that they think is going to be the most sympathetic to their campaign message. But yeah, and Democrats are doing it just like Republicans. It is probably the safest way to do a campaign, but it is the least transparent way to do a campaign. And I think voters should be, hopefully pushing back on this and telling candidates, what, we want to hear from you in person.
Mm-hmm. It's sort of to me, it feels like the big money thing again, too, with you mentioned people shopping stories, and that's something that came up on the Democrat side. Clay Aiken and Ashley Ward even held a press conference trying to get that message out there about big money and how it was allegedly hypocritical for the Democratic candidates to sort of embrace it, obviously calling out Senator Fouché. But I thought that was interesting too. And it'll be interesting to see, will they try the same thing in future elections? Because obviously this time, pointing out the outside money and saying, look at all this, it's people outside the state trying to pick the winner for you. That strategy didn't seem to work, or at least maybe they started it too late. I don't know. I'm not a campaign guy. So I don't know
I don't know. I will tell you, I mean, McCrory and Walker and Eastman to some extent were hammering Bud with that message from the almost from the get-go in this campaign. And so they started at the very beginning and it still didn't work for him either. I mean, that he's, funded by Club for Growth and pro-China, whatever was what they were saying about it. So yeah, I don't think people really care about outside money. I think I think they see money as money and they're just interested in whether or not that candidate speaks to them. And it's easier to speak to voters when you got a lot of money, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I don't see the trend changing anytime soon, probably. But anyway, I did want to mention. We should mention our preview for a session. Session officially started this week. I got gavelled in. They're not really doing anything, but next week they're starting to take up some committee meetings. Popping into the inbox. Senate folks, I wish you would please put the bills on your committee notices. We hate it when you tell us you're having a committee, but won't tell us what you're doing. Sorry, pet peeve of mine. But anyway, one thing we do know they're going to be working on is the budget. And so, they're in a really good spot because they got $6 billion extra in their pocket. So they've already approved a budget of about $27 billion for this upcoming fiscal year. So now they're going to do some changes to it or adjustments to it. It's the normal part of the second year of the 2-year cycle. The question is, how much are they going to expand their spending? Governor Cooper wanted about $2 billion over the $27 billion for some programs that he wants to put in place. I think we heard pretty clear pushback from the Republican leadership. It's like, you got some good ideas in there, but that's a lot of spending for us, and we're worried about the possibility of an upcoming recession. So they're going to hold off. I think they're going to hold off on too much extra spending. But, there's a lot of political pressure right now for wages increases for state employees and teachers. And, it's not even just political. I mean, the state workforce right now is running about a 30% vacancy rate. I mean, it's hard to run the state when one out of three positions is vacant. And it's because they don't pay enough, So that's something that I think lawmakers are really going to have to take a look at this year as they decide what they want to do with some of this money, because some of it may just have to be invested if they want the state to continue to run.
It feels like a moment, doesn't it? Like we'll maybe look back and say that maybe this year, if they do decide to do something with wages, is a moment. I mean, they may have to talk to consultants or something about how to retain people, but maybe we will see some sort of shift. I'm really interested to see what they end up doing.
I am too, and especially because for a long time, Republican leaders have sort of painted the state employees as the problem. Like we need to cut as many of these folks as we can, right? So they have made a lot of cuts at a lot of agencies. So they're already running on pretty much bare bones staff in most cases. So when you make that many cuts and then all of a sudden you can't fill the positions that you decided were essential, that's when things start to break down. So we'll have to see what they do with that. But I know the governor did want to give a 5% raise instead of 2.5% for teachers and for state employees this coming year. That doesn't sound crazy to me. I suspect state employees would like to see it a whole lot higher. Mm-hmm. But the governor did, I should mention, the governor in his budget did include basically sort of a fund for each agency, about 2% of payroll that they could use to sort of shore up pay in given positions to try to get those really critical positions filled, to try to offset, come up to what the labor market is really charging for some of these positions, like nurses, for example. Mm-hmm. But it has yet to be seen whether or not legislators are going to go for that.
That's interesting. It's less of an across the board raise and more of sort of an allowance for various departments to say, hey, use this how you see fit. That's interesting.
Yeah, although that it's never been real popular with the Republicans to do that. But you know what? Times change, right? Anyway, I think that's about all I have. Anything else you want to add?
I think that's it. The only other thing with the legislature is, coming out of the pandemic, people have talked a lot about mental health, and I think it'll be interesting to see if some of these legislators start putting their money where their mouth is. They've said schools shut down, it affected mental health of kids. We've seen some numbers that back that up. You've reported on suicide rates, not just here, but across the country. Will anything significant be done about that? That's something that I'm interested to see too.
I am too. We also are, I should mention, looking for sports betting. Because we keep hearing that it's likely to come up. It got through the Senate last year. You might remember a bill to legalize sports gambling. Made it to the House where it kind of hit the brakes because apparently the House Republican caucus was not majority in favor of it. However, it sounds like some of that support has started to broaden a little bit over the break. So we're hearing some intimations that we might actually see that bill move in this short session. But, anything you see it move in this short session is going to be clearly a priority, because they've said over and over that they're going to try to make this short. Now, I'm going to say, I've heard it before. I'll believe it when I see it, but if they really do make it short, then you should be able to tell pretty quickly what the priorities are going to be.
I mentioned moments earlier. This also seems like a moment in time with sports gambling where we see other states across the map, adopting these bills and sort of embracing it, obviously with rules in place. And so it almost feels imminent, although, like you said, believe it when you see it.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, hey, that is probably it for us this week then. We will be, of course, at the legislature monitoring all the goings on, and we will catch you up on it next week here on the WRAL. Thanks for joining us.